Phil, hello, welcome to Morning Shot. Long-time viewers of the show know you quite well, but we have grown substantially since the last time you've been here, thankfully for us. But you also have grown substantially as well in that time period. So please, just introduce yourself to who you are.
So my name's Phil Craig, and I was one of the co-founders of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Interestingly enough, our first ever interview as an organisation was with Rahman. So we're coming full circle here. So now we're about 3 years old, and we're obviously campaigning for Western Cape independence, and we've done various things over the years to pursue that with hopefully increasing degrees of success.
Well, very much so. The strategy for the CIAG was very good. It was like, let's be a pressure group, but let's get some data behind us. Yeah. So you have been responsible for a lot of data coming out of the Western Cape in terms of what are the approval ratings for an independent Western Cape. And of course, you've asked other questions along the way that support this idea that it seems to be on the data, more people support the idea of independent Western Cape than does not support it. And these are people who live in the Western Cape. How has that fueled the CIAG, knowing full well that you have this idea, but now it's been tested and people really seem to like this idea?
Yeah, look, so I think we always understood it was a process. So in our first, when we first started out with you, really we just wanted to get the idea out into the media and to allow this idea to really sort of germinate and to sort of catch hold and let people's imagination, let them start to imagine a future where they can take control of it. I think so many people sort of feeling helpless in this regime where you've got a government that you despise, you definitely didn't vote for it, but what do you do about it? And I get that's more difficult in other parts of the country. But in the Western Cape, where the majority really despise the government, there are different options. And therefore, we got this idea of Cape Independence and we put it out there. And probably the first poll then, and we had two things. First of all, we wanted to make people engage with the idea. We went out of our way to force politicians to talk about Cape Independence. We really targeted people and individuals with articles and so on. And obviously, when they talked about it, they helped us amplify this message. It didn't really matter if they loved it or hated it. It just got people talking about it. And then we polled, and in the first year, I think we had 36% in support of Cape Independence, and that was quite shocking for people, and 47% in favour of a referendum. And all of a sudden, people thought, oh my goodness, actually, people quite like this idea. And it's logical; they should like the idea. I mean, why would you? The Western Cape, the majority of voters have never once voted for the ANC. Of course, they'd like having the government they voted for rather than the one they hate, but they keep getting even though they didn't vote for it. And then over the time, then the following year that it increased, and all of a sudden support for Cape Independence was at 46%, and support for a referendum was now 58%. And then when we polled again this year, we had the real magic numbers, 68%, so just short of 7 out of 10 in favour of a referendum, and support for Cape Independence at 58%. And now we got to the point where it's great. Now we can win a referendum. Now actually we can get this thing done and get it over the line. We've just got to force the Democratic Alliance to be democratic, which of course is a challenge.
Yeah, we'll come to that. So a lot of people look at polling and they're very suspicious of it. But I know for a fact you used a very legitimate polling, polling company. This company, I may as well say Victory Research, has been used by everyone under the sun to do polling. It's literally is the gold standard in polling in South Africa, in my personal opinion. So you didn't, do this through some weird way. It's legitimate polling. It does express the views of the residents of the Western Cape. But there's a roadblock ahead. The Democratic Alliance, they had a referendum bill somewhere in the Western Cape Parliament. I have no idea where it's gone or disappeared to. And they were fully in the idea, they were fully behind the idea of the Western Cape holding referendums for residents of the Western Cape. Where are we in that scenario?
So I remember, and I guess this is coming full circle, when we first met, and I perhaps was this totally naive person who was new to politics and first time running this organisation, and I was talking with great enthusiasm, imagining that the DA were going to be really reasonable and sensible people, and the fact would prevail. And you said to me, look, they're just a bunch of cowards. At the end of the day, they're good people, but they're cowardly, and ultimately they'll never find the courage to do what needs to be done. Sadly, the DA are really good people, really nice people who are cowards and don't have the courage to do what needs to be done. So Rahman, you can put that a tick and say, I called it. So what's happened, and I really like I think Helen Zille's absolutely wonderful. We owe her a huge debt. She's a political hero of mine. I think John's a good leader. I think John's doing a good job. I think Alan's a brilliant bureaucrat with all that's good and bad entailed in that. And there's no question that the Western Cape is the best run province in South Africa, and that in no small part is to do with the DA. So let's not sort of cack on the DA for too much of a thing. But the reality is, what we have found in all of our discussions is they love ideas. When you first sit down with them and you give them an idea and you talk to them and say, look, this is the solution, they're always brimming with excitement. It's fantastic. And actually, as it gets more and more real, they start to get colder and colder feet. And then actually, they're kind of like the parachute jumper who never wants to actually jump. They always land with the plane with their parachute still on them because they never actually have the courage to do the things that need to be done. And that's exactly why we are with the referendum. So we got them to the point. We talked about the referendum legislation. They promised to bring this referendum bill, and in fact, they promised to table a referendum on Cape independence, which included a question. It was a deal we did with the DA in 2021. It was a promise. It was a promise that John Steenhuisen made to me personally. It's not high in the sky. It wasn't some lowly dig. It was a deal that we did, and that's where we were. They did publish in the Gazette, the government Gazette. Here's the bill. They wrote the bill. They published the bill, and then the backtracking started. So now we've got through the 2021 elections. We're just going to bring it. Long story short, we discovered 18 months later that secretly they'd cancelled the bill. The bill was they'd actually stopped it. That would have obviously nearly caused a blue murder, and actually was quickly resolved. And I have to sort of give credit to a couple of the leaders who it was seemingly done behind their back. But the result is, the bill then was brought on, and then finally the bill was tabled 2 years after it. But in that process, Alan Windy is busy writing to us saying, well, I can't make a decision on the referendum because we're waiting for this bill, the bill that his own party has cancelled. So we had this sort of slightly farcical situation that kind of dragged on, and eventually we got to the point where we said to the DA, right, look, you know what, fair's fair. We're coming up to a 2024 election. You've kind of really not done. We didn't deal with you before the 2021 election. You've broken it. Let's just get it really clear with everybody. We asked for a written agreement. We asked for that same agreement to be put in writing in the form of a referendum accord, and we asked the DA to sign it and to publicly release it so that everybody knew where we stood. Were they going to call a referendum? Were they not going to call a referendum? What was the question going to be? So that we could all go into the elections. And then the DA, what did they do? They stalled and they panicked and they prevaricated. They tried to not answer the question. They wrote back 5 emails that avoided all of the points until eventually we kind of said, look, you know what? Okay, enough of this shit. We now are going to have to do. So we ended up saying, right, what we're going to do is we're going to poll again, which we did. We're going to go and get a letter, which we're going to write to Premier Windy. We got 30,000 voters to sign it in the space of 4 weeks. And we turned up at the Western Cape Parliament by appointment, at which point the Western Cape Parliament said they couldn't find anybody to receive it publicly. They tried to ban us from filming it. But anyway, we delivered them this letter and we said, here you go, you've got a letter signed by 30,500 people. You've got 7 days. Are you going to call a referendum? Yes or no? Just don't stop bullshitting. It's now or never. We want an answer. And Alan Windy came back and said no. And he said no, not only no, but actually because he doesn't like Cape independence, which of course had us totally infuriated. Kind of like, at what point did it come into the Constitution that the Premier has the power to call referendums, which he decides based on what he likes, as opposed to what the people he's supposed to be serving likes. The whole point of a referendum is to ask the people you're serving what they want. It's not, no, I don't want to ask them what they want. I don't want to ask those 3 million people what they want because I don't like the idea. So that's where we are. So we've got to the point where they've broken the deal. They're not going to honour their promise. And now they've put a lot of people, including us, in a very, very difficult situation. And we've got to respond to that.
Yeah, that's the problem with the DA. As you said, I get along with most of the upper echelons. I'm not saying I'm brilliant friends with everyone there, but they really are competent, smart people there. But as an organization, they're just not brave enough, in my estimation, to run South Africa. They just aren't. You need guts, and you just need to do something stupid sometimes, right? Just to get going. But anyway, enough about the DA. So Ellen Windy comes back to you after like 2 years and says, you know what, this referendum's no-go because I don't like the idea. Apparently he can do that for some reason. So you are telling yourself, oh, well, screw you, Ellen Windy. We'll just start our own political party
Absolutely.
based exclusively on this idea. So it's called the Referendum Party, as far as I understand. Tell us a bit more about it.
Sure. So, yeah, absolutely. We haven't officially launched that party yet, although we've announced today that we're going to be launching it in the next few weeks. So, yeah, it's set. We're just making the final preparations, last adjustments to the website, assembling the team, and so on. So, the Referendum Party is incredibly simple. Effectively, if we split Cape Independent supporters in the Western Cape, let's say out of every 10 Cape Independent supporter, 7 vote DA and 3 vote for somebody else. Now, the 3 that vote for somebody else are fine. They can go vote for the Freedom Front Plus. They can go vote for the Cape Independence Party. They really haven't got any problems because they just vote for what they want, because they can vote for the political party and for a referendum. When it comes to DA voters, they're in a difficult spot because they... now, what do? The DA effectively saying, okay, I want to vote for a DA government because that's my present. There they are, they're governing, they're doing a pretty good job. And actually, I want service delivery. I don't want the ANC. So therefore, I've got this. But actually, I recognise that my future is so much better with Cape Independence. But now I'm forced to choose. Do I vote for my present with the DA, or do I go and vote for some other Cape Independence party? And so we said, well, look, you know what? This is something that we can very easily resolve. And let's just create a political party that's designed for that 7 out of 10 people who want Cape Independence and a DA government. So we said, right, we'll form a party called the Referendum Party. We'll promise under all circumstances to vote with the DA and put them into government. So there you go. Now you can completely relax. You're going to get a DA government. You're going to deal with your present. And we're going to make sure they get a referendum on Cape Independence. So the simplest version of the Referendum Party is the Referendum Party is a vote for a DA government in the Western Cape and a referendum on Cape Independence. So DA vote, we want DA voters to not vote for the DA, but vote for the Referendum Party. You'll still get a DA government, but you get the referendum on Cape Independence, and that's the crux of it. And we're going to release people from this unfair dilemma and say you can vote for your present and you can vote for your future at the same time. Vote for us, single issue, no other policies. Nothing else other than a referendum on Cape Independence that 68% of Western Cape voters want.
So, Byron, just to bring you up to speed, we just went through the history of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and now we've just reached the point where Phil explained what the Referendum Party is about. And the party basically is we're going to vote with the DA on everything, but then voters now have a choice to vote with the DA to govern and vote with the Referendum Party to have a referendum, because a lot of DA guys want a referendum. So my next question was going to be, but Byron, if you want to ask it, go ahead. Are you going to do this in the national election or the municipal election? Because, I mean, that does matter.
We're going to do it in both. We're going to do it in both because we've got agendas that we want to deliver in both the provincial parliament and the national parliament.
So you don't sound very English. Sorry, very South African. I just want to.
No. So I still have my is it a plummy? I don't know. My British accent, absolutely.
I'm just asking that this one.
Well, we are the British. We couldn't help ourselves. We always had to have our finger on the scale somewhere in the world. So I'm here now 20 years. I'm married to an Afrikaner. It's my homeland, but hell, we're going to save this place. It's beautiful. We're not
so basically, you're UKIP, but for the Cape.
Well, I don't know too much about UKIP because I was in South Africa by that time. But yeah, look, I wouldn't. People have said I'm South Africa's Farage, so maybe that's the truth. I don't know. Well, certainly, if we can replicate their successes in terms of forcing the government to listen to the people that elected it and calling a referendum that allows the people to make the choices, then I'll be very happy if I can duplicate their success.
So let me just explain. So if you run in the national election come 2024, and that is your goal, how will that enable you to have a referendum in the Western Cape? Because the national election is for like Parliament, not Western Cape Parliament, as far as I understand.
So we'll do in both. So first of all, just think in terms of the electoral system. So our target is 100,000 votes. Now in this election, there will be 3 ballot papers. There'll be the provincial ballot paper, there'll be a regional ballot paper, and there'll be a national ballot paper. But the people can vote on all 3 ballots. So if somebody comes along and ticks Referendum Party, Referendum Party, Referendum Party, 100,000 votes would deliver us 2 MPs in the national parliament and 3 MEPs in the Western Cape Parliament. And they would fulfil different roles. So actually, which is the more important to us? The Western Cape Parliament. That's where we want to put the Premier under pressure to call a referendum and to constantly remind the Western Cape government that it answers to the Western Cape people and it has sworn an oath to act in their best interest. And currently, it isn't acting in their best interest. So that's the primary one. But in the national parliament, we could do different things. First of all, we can make shit. And actually, I mean, in a positive way, that if any institution needs turning on its head, it's that one. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of incompetent, corrupt imbeciles, governing or not governing a country. And actually, to have some voices in there saying, look, you know what? Yeah, this isn't on. We will be fearless in that parliament. We won't be buffoons like the EFF. But actually, we will be there. You don't hear in the national parliament this talks of Cape independence. You will hear at every single step Cape independence, about self-determination, and all of the issues around making sure that democracy is meaningful. But there's one other thing that we want to do that's quite meaningful in the national parliament. We want to try and change the constitution to allow citizen-instigated referendums. And that can only be done in the national parliament. Now, the model we want to use is the New Zealand model. And in New Zealand, if in any section of the population or the electorate that wants the referendum, if you can get 10% of the voters in that electorate to say they want a referendum, then the citizens can instigate the referendum. Now, that becomes really important because here we are in the Western Cape, where 70% or 68% of Western Cape voters want a referendum, and the Premier has made himself a roadblock. He's stood in there and said, well, it doesn't matter what you want. Me personally as an individual, I'm not going to give you. I'm stopping you having a referendum on Cape independence. In New Zealand, he couldn't do that. And we want to make sure that in South Africa, he can't do it too. Now, I don't know whether we'll get that change to the constitution passed. I suspect that it might not be entirely unpopular across the House. And therefore there's a possibility that we could get that passed. And then suddenly, Alan Winde will not be the gatekeeper of Cape independence. So therefore, that's the role that we want in the National Assembly. Sorry, Byron, say again?
Sorry, the problem's going to be, I think you will get that passed, but the sword swings both ways. I think that I can see certain individuals in Parliament really enjoying that idea and then trying to run a referendum on EWC. Yeah.
Perhaps.
I can see that happening. So yeah, I can see you getting that done, but I'm not sure it would be entirely for the best of us. But anyway, it's another here.
Politics is not for the faint-hearted. At the end of the day, the system's screwed up, and if we don't do something, South Africa is going to end up being a failed state. So let's do something. And there are some.
Sorry, buddy. Yeah. Well, just got to correct you there. What do you mean by going to be? It already is, isn't it?
Okay.
That's the problem.
Fair enough.
Yeah. It still has lived in the Western Cape for far too long, and it shows. Come to Joburg.
Clearly. Come to the Eastern Cape. You know, the parts of the Cape that you guys aren't taking along for the ride. Look, I'm all for Cape independence, but you got to take Koko and Nelson Mandela Bay with you, right? Okay.
Look at it. Ironically, we often get this. So our ultimate vision. If you Google the voting map of South Africa, you'll see there's a really clear divide that goes about a quarter of the way into the Eastern Cape and about 2/3 of the way into the Northern Cape. And ultimately, our view is you have to start with this in the Western Cape, use the Western Cape Parliament, and once you then get the Western Cape government negotiating with the national government, then there should be secondary referendums at municipal level along the border to establish who wants to be which side, because I think that's exactly right. And I think there are large parts of the Northern and the Eastern Cape that are going to say, well, actually, you know what? If there's going to be a separation, we want to be at that side of the border. And again, the democratic solution is to allow them. I don't know where those lines come, but I'm certain it wouldn't be the final borders of the Western Cape.
You know what I found distasteful about this conversation, Ramon? It's exactly the conversation we had personally with John Steenhuisen. Just raise an army and conquer the land you want, man. Just go medieval. Just go back to the 18 whatever version of stuff, man.
Genghis Khan. Well, much easier.
Just this referendum stuff and voting, and it sounds like a lot of work.
But in fairness, the British did use that recipe for several hundred years, Byron, but it's become quite unpopular now. So here we are. We're reduced to the lowly subject of democracy and what people actually want. But there you go. Who am I to argue? I've been naturalised.
So, Phil, the thing is, secession, right? We can have all the ambitions in the world. You can win your 100,000 votes, get your seats, whatever you want to. Fundamentally, it is still a question of geopolitics at the end of the day. Like, does it matter for you what the world looks like in terms of a sort of unipolar versus multipolar world with BRICS or with the UN or whatever the case might be? How are you factoring those elements into it? Because they can determine the future of the Western Cape, independent or not.
Sure. No, absolutely. Look, so obviously, every secession, and there's far more. Interesting enough, when I don't know if you caught the press conference, one of the stats I picked up, and this might shock people because they keep saying, "Oh, it can never happen." In the last 50 years, there's been 81 independence referendums around the world, one every 7 months. And there's been 35 new countries. On average, one every 17 months, a new country gets its independence, is born. So actually, it's far more prominent than people think. Now, to a certain extent, here we are. It's hard enough us trying to control South African politics and make an influence. We have very, very little influence. So to a certain extent, we're passengers internationally. We try to do what we can. But it's always a risk. And the ultimate, if you end up with a contested secession, the ultimate arbiter is the international community through the process of international recognition. So geopolitics are critically important. By pure chance, and not at the end of the day, obviously the sort of wars that are going on are absolutely horrendous, and under no circumstances would I have wanted them or take any delight in them. But actually, they absolutely have fallen perfectly for Cape independence. And you've ended up in a situation, particularly with the Ukrainian crisis, where the world is divided between the people who are sympathetic with the old Soviet bloc and Russia and China and so on, and then the West. And you have this very, very clear division. And actually, that division has been manifested down into the Western Cape. So you have the South African national government conducting military exercises with Russia and China, and you have the Western Cape government carrying out trade negotiations with America, bringing the Ukrainian ambassador into its thing, banning Russian diplomats from its premises, and painting up the town hall in Cape Town in the Ukrainian flag. So actually, geopolitics has landed at our doorstep. And we do quite a lot of work on things. And interestingly enough, and I have this on good authority from suddenly the Cape trade route has become really, really significant in geopolitics. And the West, recognizing that they may well lose the control of the Panama Canal, they probably already have lost of the sort of Horn of Africa, the Suez Canal rather, now in a situation where these South Atlantic trade routes become absolutely critical. And actually, who controls the South Atlantic trade route around the Cape of Good Hope? The Western Cape. So ironically, geopolitics have really fallen into our lap. And right now, I think we would get, and we have had some discussions, but I mean, obviously, you never know. But at this point in time, I'd be more confident than ever been about getting international support for Cape independence. I think that it's already starting to happen. Ironically, Alan Winde, when he banned the Russian diplomats from the thing, actually broke international law, and he started acting. There are 4 provisions of a country. You have to have a defined territory, you have to have a border, you have to have a permanent population, and you have to have the ability to enter into negotiations with foreign states. Alan Winde gave himself the 4th. No constitutional right. He actually started acting like an independent country, and how many times have the national government accused him of it? So that's coming, that's falling in our lap.
But that's what we said to John: raise an army. What is the national government going to do? The guys don't even have bullets. I mean, half their tanks and trains don't work. I mean, you'll be fine. Like farmers with pitchforks, some boers with a pitchfork will be fine. Like you'll stand guard just fine.
He doesn't need an army. He needs to do one thing. He needs to hold a referendum. Once he's had the referendum and he wins it, he needs to ask for independence. If the national government says no, then the Western Cape just starts announcing to Western Cape taxpayers that they must start paying their tax to a Western Cape tax authority.
Did you hear that, Ramon? He said ask. They must ask the national. You don't ask. You tell. Say, hey, you lot must voetsek. Don't come here with your rubbish, and then off you go, man. Like that's the way you do it.
But anyway, we're dealing with the realms of liberal democracy, Byron. Please don't come here and upend, what this freedom has brought to us. So Phil, another sort of question in terms of geopolitics. It seems like you sort of prefer to be on the sort of Western bloc of this multipolar world. So Byron and I are not, we're not particularly pro anything or against anything, but America is starting to lose its luster. Western Europe is a slave, and is going to, crawl under the debris full of immigrants and a lack of energy and all the rest of it due to Western postmodern liberal ideology of note. Would it not be more prudent to maybe speak to the Russians and the Chinese? Because it's far more, literally, it's far more easy negotiation. They want something and they'll give it to you in exchange for something. There's no such thing as we need trans people in schools and stuff like that. Why are you opposed to that?
I think the ideal position would be that we'd be relatively neutral, and actually find our own place in the world. Obviously, geopolitics will mean that you're going to have to sort of have sympathies to one to the other. Look, I mean, we have to be realistic, and I don't think you and I are going to share views on Russia and China. I think we've got 5 members of the Security Council. Russia and China are longtime allies of the ANC, and I think the notion that somehow we're going to go Russia and China and they're going to give us our independence from South Africa, I think is probably a slightly fanciful notion. And the question is, what is going to be the price of our freedom? I don't know is the honest answer. That's going to be an uncomfortable discussion. But I think that let's just start off and saying, look, neutrality would be a perfect situation. But I think the Western Cape has different trading partners to South Africa. South Africa's biggest trading partner is China. The Western Cape's isn't. At the end of the day, it's trading partners of the US and Europe. We obviously do trade with China, so we already have a split. We're already much more Western than South Africa. That's just a reality, whether we like that or not. So I think that die is relatively cast. And I'm probably, you and you should be in the same boat as me, I guess. But I probably have less of a fear of the West hailing from it.
Yeah, but what it shows is that quite often we have these conversations with politicians. I mean, as you know, we have an entire channel discussing politics, speaking to politicians. And quite often you find this, unfortunately, with the Western Cape politicians, regardless of who they are. It's obvious that they have not engaged China or Russia. We have. And it's very interesting to hear the idea that, they're long-standing natural allies of the ANC and that they wouldn't switch allegiance. That's kind of not true. The reality is, and it's a criticism we've leveled at the DA many times, the reason that Russia sides with the ANC is because the DA refuses to engage them. That's a fact. So it would be probably more fruitful to engage these parties rather than ignore them and assume that the natural allies remain in the US and the Western allies. I understand why that's being said, but I think it's a little bit disingenuous. I don't know what you think, Ramon, but I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say that naturally they wouldn't give you your independence. I think you'd be very surprised. I mean, the reality though is that China and Russia doesn't get involved in local disputes. So if there's something that you do, they're like, it's not our problem. You do what you do. But I think it would be foolish not to engage those individuals. I think you may find them more sympathetic to your cause.
Well, that would be music to my ears if we, at the end, like I say, if we could get neutrality, that would be the perfect situation where we just made our own way in the world. So and I would be happy to be wrong on that issue. But I suspect I'm not. But I am willing to accept that I might be, because I haven't had discussions with China and Russia at this point in time.
Stick with us, Phil. We can be your international policy advisors. Yeah, ambassadors. I pick Hungary. He can go to Venezuela. That's fine.
Hey,
anyway, I know you love Venezuelan ladies. Come on, Byron.
I'll take Poland. You have Hungary. I'll take Poland.
Well, I mean, Poland unfortunately is no longer based. They voted in the Green and the Libs in the last weekend, so fine, you can have it. But anyway,
did they really?
Yes, unfortunately so. Law and order is gone. They're going to have a lot of Bangladeshis living there very, very soon. But Phil, sorry, I don't want to get into the the petty arguments of Morning Shot here. Let's talk about Cape independence. Strategy is 100,000 votes for the next national election come 2024. Apparently, you are quite ready for that. You think you can achieve that in a material way. What really is at stake for people who might still be thinking to themselves, listen, this Cape independence, like I sort of do agree with it in general, but I mean, it's so far out of this realms of possibility that, you know, this party is basically just a clown party. I mean, you know, UKIP started like that and became the most successful party in the UK by a large margin. How can you assuage people's fear that they might be wasting their vote? Because that's what the DA's favourite thing to say is at the time of the election.
Well, since we're going to give it to them, then we'll be wasting our vote on them. So, and obviously that's by design. Look, I think interesting enough. So what would be our message? So we've kind of got quite a layered message for this. So the core message is to say to people in 2024, look, you're voting for one of two futures. Yeah, there are two potential futures for the Western Cape. We can end up being another African failed state, you know, and the DA can hold out a bit longer, and we can hold the wolf from the door for a bit of a while, but ultimately, yeah, at the end, if we remain part of South Africa, then the Western Cape is going to fail with the rest of South Africa. Or we can create a first world country at Africa's southern tip and actually start building up, attracting skilled talent, growing our economy. And we've got these two futures. And the question is, well, what decides them? Now, everybody knows if you vote ANC, you end up with a failed state. What they don't understand is if you vote DA, you end up with a failed state. You just end up there a bit more slowly. And actually, we've chosen 4 issues to try and illustrate people. And let me get this. So digest this one first of all. If you don't control the policy, you don't control the outcome. That's the reality. Now let's take 4 really good examples, and these are going to be the 4 examples you're going to get sick of us talking about. First of all, if we don't control economic policy in the Western Cape, and therefore we have 25% unemployment. We don't control policing in the Western Cape, and therefore we have the highest murder rate in the world. We don't control taxation and spending, and therefore instead of our money, our taxes being spent on uplifting the Western Cape people, they're being spent to fund corruption and incompetence of a national ANC government. And we don't control our borders, which means that the Western Cape has been overrun with people who are coming there illegally, and then the Western Cape government is having to spend vast amounts of its money funding people who have illegally settled land in the Western Cape, as opposed to uplifting the people that are there legally. So there are the 4 issues. It comes back to the same thing. And actually, what is the DA going to say? Does the DA say, no, we don't want control of economic policy? No, we don't want control of policing. We've been fighting control of policing for 5 years without any success. No, we don't want taxation. We're happy for our tax money to be given to the ANC. They're doing such a good job. Or, no, leave the borders open. It's great. Just let everybody come here. We won't worry about Frans Cronje telling the people who are arriving here are actively voting against the DA. And one of the fascinating things that was really interesting in our polling this year is one of the questions we asked, we wanted to find out who was voting DA tactically. So the question we asked was, who did you vote for? And then why did you vote for them? Did you vote for them because you like the party? Did you vote for them to keep some other party out? Or did you vote for them because they were the least worst option? And we wrote that question wanting to find out how many people were voting for the DA just to keep the ANC out. But the number was actually much smaller. It was only 10%. And I thought it was much higher. And most people were voting for the DA because it was the least worst option. What was totally fascinating, we hadn't expected, is nearly 50% of ANC voters were voting to keep that DA out of power. And that was and that completely reflected France's stuff. So these are the real practical issues. So what do we sum down to Cape independence? And we've summed all of that up, which says a DA government in Cape Town cannot save the Western Cape if an ANC government, or worse in Pretoria, is still making all of the decisions. And that's the nuts of Cape independence. That's your future. Why does voting DA in the Western Cape still leave you a failed state? Well, because the DA is actually in control of bugger all. It can try and manage stuff more efficiently, but I mean, it can't get rid of cadre deployment, it can't get rid of affirmative action, it can't get rid of corruption, it can't get rid of Becky Chile, it can't get rid of fear of fuck all, it can't get it can do absolutely nothing. At the end of the day, it's just managing the best that it can. It's crisis management, and it's great. I'm very grateful it's managed crisis. But if we want to have a first world future, which we can have, then we have to move beyond that. And one of the things, think about what the Western Cape, or it wasn't the Western Cape, was like before 1910. We had electricity, we had railways, we had a non-racial democracy, we had a parliament, which South Africa managed to burn down. Actually, it was a pretty functional place. We've just set up our first offices in a place called the Old Tannery in Wellington. The Old Tannery was built in 1875 and was the largest tanning works in the Southern Hemisphere before South Africa existed. Less than about half a kilometre down the road is Wellington Railway Station. Wellington Railway Station used to run from Cape Town. It was the first main line in South Africa. The trains were more reliable in 1875 than they are in 2023. So we have to get control of these things, and we must. South Africa's been a disaster. So maybe I'm digressing off of there, but let's come back to that and say, why is Cape independence important? Because it puts the Western Cape people in control of their own destiny, and it doesn't matter what government you elect. If you leave the ANC or whoever comes next in charge of the things, we must be able to make those decisions for ourselves and have practical implications.
I got a question for you. And that is,
Shoot.
At what point in time does Cape Independence get sued by Pepsi for stealing its logo?
Well, I think we're fairly safe. Although you may have picked up that somebody, I don't know if you picked up the thing that the DA tried to threaten us with court action about 2 weeks ago for calling them out over the referendum promise. although they disappeared with their tail between their legs when we asked them to confirm whether it was true or not. But no, I think we're probably safe from Pepsi.
Byron, do you have substantive questions about Cape independence?
I thought that was a very important question because you can see the similarity between Cape Independence logo and the Pepsi logo. It looks remarkably similar.
Self-determination of a large portion of the population versus IP. Substantive.
Well, it would be very unfortunate if the self-determination was undermined by legal action from Pepsi for stealing their logo. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. I see IG's been around for a while, so I think that's fine. So I've practically exhausted my questions on Cape Independence and on the Referendum Party. So, Byron, do you have any questions on your side?
I will admit that I do not. I mean, I like the idea of Cape Independence. I think that most, let's call them most white South Africans probably do, because it gives us an opportunity to at least build a country independently of a government that basically says we don't really want your assistance in building what we destroy. So I think that's how the majority of whites feel when it comes through to this topic.
Well, I assume coloured as well.
Well, I was just going to say, did you pick up in our polling this year for the first time?
I can't talk for coloured, Romanus. It's outside of my lived experience. But right. What I can talk about is the whiteys. And yes, the majority of whiteys probably do feel like it. But I do think that a problem you may have getting this passed in the future is one, timescales. And as we know, the Western Cape is currently the crown jewel of South Africa in terms of, job creation, stability, governance, blah, 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 all the usual statistics. But everybody understands that the Western Cape is on a time clock because there is large scale migration occurring of, unfortunately, underprivileged individuals to the Western Cape looking for a better life. Many times they move into areas, specifically townships, and end up voting for the ANC. The ironies right themselves. But it does mean that a number of individuals, including, parties of the IFP and so forth, we have covered even on our own channel numerous times, where they have called the warning around the influx of individuals into that province and what it may mean for future demographic change, specifically around voting lines. So I do wonder long-term the practical implications, but I think the idea is great. And I think if you can get it done, you'll probably find a large amount of individuals migrating to the Western Cape, more so than there are already, and there's already a substantial amount.
But of course, migration itself is not an issue. Migration is it's illegal migration that's the issue. If people come legitimately and rent a home or buy a piece of land or do whatever and set themselves up, that's fine. And obviously you want skilled immigration. And actually, just touching there on Ramon's point, I have to say in our last polling that support for Cape independence is now higher amongst coloured voters than it is amongst white voters, which is phenomenal. That's been and look, we've had support grow amongst black voters as well. I have to say, amongst all populations, but the most noticeable growth, the real difference, is when we first polled in 2020, support for amongst white voters was about double the level of support amongst coloured voters, percentage-wise. Obviously, coloured voters are more populous. Whereas actually now it's substantially. I think this last poll, it was 78% of coloured voters supported Cape independence, which is massive and obviously completely understandable, since they're bearing the brunt of people often think about affirmative action. They forget that it's far worse for coloured people than for white people. This illegal land evasion is far worse for coloured people than for white people. So actually, predominantly we have to recognise that the coloured people are directly descended from the indigenous people of the Western Cape, and they really have come off worse under both a white government and a black government. At the end of the day, and a chance to have their own government, or a government where they play a leading role, is very, very attractive, and rightly so. And I've got a lot of time for the coloured people because they, apart from anything else, they're the only racial group in South Africa, perhaps with Indians too, who habitually vote across racial lines based on based on merit, and that is a real feather in their cap.
So, Phil, actually, last question from me on that. So the coloured vote, there is a political party called the Patriotic Alliance, which is a coloured nationalist party. We know them quite well. We've done videos with them. We did vlogs with them as well, led by Gaten McKenzie. And when you speak to Gaten McKenzie about referendums on independent Western Cape, he says it's a white supremacy project and he's not in favour of it at all. Polling has come out from the Social Research Foundation to say that the PA is not really visible in the polling. It's within the margin of error of 2 or 3%. The DA has increased its vote amongst the coloured voters as well. So do you find yourself having quite a good niche in terms of coloureds are not going to vote for themselves, they're going to vote for the idea more than the identity of the party?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, so the part, we don't know yet in terms, because we haven't launched the party, so obviously we don't know exactly who it's going to attract. I can tell you who we've targeted and what we've done, but we have a very specific approach here. We're not going to try and be all things to all men. That would be foolhardy for a small party. We don't need to win the elections. We need to get this 100,000 people, which is our real magic number, and that's a huge ask. So we've identified from our polling who is it that most strongly supports Cape independence and votes DA. That's our target, and we know exactly who that is. We have those analysed across 3 polls down to an inch of their lives. We have those people's contact details, and if we get our marketing right, then 80% of the people of the Western Cape will never hear from us. And the other 20% will hear nothing but us. And actually, because we're not interested in being all things to all men, we're interested in finding people who love the idea of Cape independence, voted DA in 2019, but are going to vote Referendum Party in 2024, so that we can leverage the DA to listen to the people who elected it. And that's our simple plan.